This is our great pleasure to welcome you all, organized by University of Three Generations. Um, for the benefit of new guests coming in our invitation, I would like to say a few words about University of Three Generation, why I am attracted towards this organization. I am Sushil Thapa, recently joined as a life member of University of Three Generations. That attracted me for its vision that we need to treat all three generations equally, and we should have a sharing platform of the experiences of older generation and the energy and inertia of adult and young generation. We need to understand the issues of all three generations and put it into action to facilitate the social transformation, economic transformation of this country. I'm really encouraged and motivated with the dashing personality of the chairman of this organization, Professor Dr. Rajendra Casey. To start this program, I would like to request chairman and the principal of this school, Professor Dr. Rajendra Casey, to give his welcome remarks.
We have a small group, but very beautiful and very intellectual group and very fruitful groups. And we have big halls, but still more delegates are coming up very soon. Mr. Robert is a special paper presenter today. He came from very far away, from America. I think he's flying tomorrow. And then we get a good chances, his experiences sharing about the anti-corruption and cybersecurity, whatever. But he will share about the more details with us. Different types of like doctors, professors, teachers, social workers, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste and good afternoon. Very warm greeting on behalf of University of Three Generation. I write down on short notice about University of Three Generation. Most of participants knows about the University of Three Generation already programs. The University of Three Generation U3G is established to empower and involve all three generations to lead and transform the society. It aims to better the lives of children, youth and adults through intergenerational collaboration. It aims to promote, foster and encourage all the stakeholders. It aims to promote and stakeholders to the collaboration, partnership, alliance and development based on 4 P's modalities: public, private and people partnership. We all know that our team, we are wonderful teams like bureaucrats, Nepal police, Nepal army, corporate sectors and various sectors people engaged and working here. I would like to tell one quotation about the three generation. Yesterday is history, tomorrow is mystery, today is gift, therefore we are here. Therefore, this is one of the good platform to us where we can share the ideas, our failure story, successful story, our network and net worth. We can share. That is good platform. If you have any types of your good experience or bad experience, you can't share, you can't tell to other places, but this is the good place. If you give a chance to the University of Three Generation, we can share the ideas. Three Generations University, that means youth, child, and adult. This is separate entity in Nepal. Therefore, it has not any own university building or anything else, nothing else. Therefore, we working together, and then we can passing the knowledge through older or adult people to new generation, or new generation can passing the knowledge to old generation. It is a multiple benefit to each other. We are very small group, we are working in small places, but we never know. One moment can change the day, one event can change a career, one day can change a life, and one life can change a world. Therefore, we are here. Thank you so much, and welcome to all. Thank you so much.
Now I would like to welcome the main attraction of this event organized by University of Three Generation, the experience sharing of corruption investigation. Please welcome, help me welcome to Mr. Robert Van Wey to share his experience.
Good afternoon. I am Robert Van Wey. I am a recently retired criminal investigator and intelligence analyst with the New York State Division of Criminal Justice. My primary role is public corruption, financial crimes, and computer crimes. And when it comes to public corruption, a lot of times those three things go together. So I want to give you a couple case studies, but really quickly, I just want to talk about, in general terms, what the difficulty is. As all of you know, the laws that regulate corruption and the abuse of office or power are written by the very people who are going to do it. So that's a problem. So when it comes to preparing for corruption, a lot has to be done on the legislative side before the corruption ever happens. I'm not going to talk about that, but I can tell you that as an investigator, that's always been one of our greatest difficulties, is that we know the act, we know the conduct, we know it's wrong, but we don't always know it's a crime. So that's an important part of it. But I'm going to talk about it from the criminal investigator standpoint. So I come from New York State, and in the United States, we have federal elections, we have state elections, and then a bunch of smaller ones from there. State elections are governed by state law. So the cases that I'm going to speak of are confined a little bit to New York State, which is not a very small state, so it still affects easily 20 million people. And generally speaking, the laws are similar. So in New York State and in the United States in general, there are two sort of broad categories of corruption. You have the corruption to obtain the office, and you have the corruption once you're in the office. So the first case I want to talk about is how those violations are done in obtaining the office. So in the United States, the idea is that elections are the most fair and that the voter is treated the most equitably when the candidates are transparent about how they got to where they got. So in other words, campaign funding, the types of activities they do on the campaign trail. The idea is that if you're going to vote for someone, you should at least sort of know who helped get them into that office so that when the favors come out later, you can kind of see the connection. Unfortunately, the laws related to elections in the United States are not often prosecuted. In New York State, they're not even under the penal law, they're under the election law, so they're not even that well known. And a lot of people will claim that they're just not aware of them, which may be in part true. So in my first case, we had a group of people, about 5 people. Their goal was to install politicians in key posts that had control over funding for various things. that they were then going to exploit after the fact. So they had to get their people into office. Once those people were in office, the idea was they would have access to the funds that those people would have a great level of control over. These are below the state level races. So what they would do is they had to avoid the transparency issue. So they had to avoid being able to identify who donors were. They also had to get past the fact that we have limits. So technically in New York State, an individual or a business is only allowed to donate so much money to a campaign to prevent essentially a rich person or company from buying a politician. These 5 people concocted a scheme where they started setting up shell companies all across the state. So by shell companies, they were companies on paper that didn't actually do anything. And what they did was, in order to donate money, they would get large amounts of money from these sort of hidden donors to contract with their business to do services that these businesses were incapable of doing. And then those companies would then turn around and donate that money all to those politicians that they wanted to install in office. So it was a pretty clever scheme. So the first difficulty was tracking the money. So when it comes to any kind of corruption investigation, the 2 motivations are always money or power. So if you know what the motivation is, it gives you a bold start to how to approach analyzing that investigative process that you're going to follow. So in our case, it was a little bit of both. They wanted the power at the end of it, but they needed the money to get that person into the position of power. So it was very important for us to audit the financial accounts for the campaigns that were at issue. And then in doing that, so now we have money coming in from all these businesses. Then what it required us to do was to go back and identify every one of these businesses. We were fortunate in that we kind of knew who the candidates at issue were ahead of time because the case came to us by someone who complained that this was happening. So without that, I think it would have been extremely challenging because on paper, everything looked legal. So we had to track down the money, and then we had to track down the actual authenticity of all the businesses that were donating the money. Now, New York State is very famous in the United States for having something called the LLC loophole. The LLC loophole is basically you can establish a business on paper in New York State with no person, no individual attached to that business. So, and basically all it requires is to file a few forms, spend a few $100s per form, and off you go. So you can imagine if you have a good amount of money at issue that you want to give to a potential politician, you can set up these businesses, as many as you need to, and then each of them legally under the paradigm for election law in New York State, each of them can donate up to a certain dollar amount. So now all my money's coming from one source, but I've just made tens of thousands of dollars of donations over the top of the limit, of the legal limit to this individual, which in the United States in general, the more money that goes into a campaign, the more likely that campaign's gonna win. They will put TV ads, they'll put radio ads, they'll put social media, you buy the targeted ads, so it goes to the people most likely to vote. So money's a very powerful tool toward getting someone elected. So from the criminal investigator standpoint, in that particular case, the challenge was proving that not only were they actually circumventing the law, but also that they were doing it illegally, because technically they argued, unsuccessfully, thankfully, but they argued that these are different businesses, regardless of what they do. On paper, they're businesses, and under the law, the businesses can each donate money. So that's where it goes back to what I said in the beginning, is that legislation is a challenge, because in that case, they arguably were legally correct in that argument, but we pursued it anyway, and ultimately, every one of their candidates dropped out except for one who lost his election, and there were several arrests that were made for the people that were moving the funds in the background. So we did have a success in that case. But it was a close call because the law was not on our side for the complexity of the operation that they had. I would also point out that that case used one of the election laws written in New York State, which was first written in 1985. Our case was the first time that law was ever used to prosecute a case. So that law was on the books for 30 years, and no one had ever prosecuted an election crime based on that. And part of that reason is because the police in the United States generally pursue penal crimes, and this was not under the penal law, it was under the election law. And part of the problem was that many people didn't feel that that election law was strong enough to make a criminal case. We decided to go for it, and we won in that particular case. So that's an example before the seat. Once the seat is taken, you have a whole different type of corruption. So some are in it for personal benefit. They want money, they want items, and they're willing to trade their role in office to do that. Others just like the power and will wield it in ways that they shouldn't be. In the case that I found most interesting, and actually the two defendants were sentenced a month before I came to Nepal. The case took us 6 years to prosecute, which in and of itself is an issue, but that's for another talk. So in this case, we had a New York State Supreme Court judge. New York State Supreme Court judges are not the highest level of judge, actually. For whatever reason, our highest court is actually called the Court of Appeals, but they're a fairly highly placed judge with a fairly large amount of power when it comes to cases. So we had a state Supreme Court judge, and then we had another individual who I can only describe as a loose associate of this judge. We still to this day don't exactly know how they know each other and how they initially connected. But basically what was happening was this individual had businesses that he was associated with who were in a major $20 million commercial lawsuit that was in front of this judge. Now, the individual himself was a lawyer, but he was not a lawyer involved in the case at all. There were other lawyers. So what he was doing, and the crazy part of this case is a lot of it was done by email, which still to this day kind of blows my mind that they more or less wrote out the case by email. But this individual was communicating with the judge, promising him all kinds of things. One of the key things he was promising was some assistance for this judge's son, because the judge had concerns about when the son graduated college. He was afraid he was going to leave, maybe join the military or something. He didn't want him to go, and so he wanted to find him a lucrative job in our area. So the judge has the interest of getting his son the job. The other guy wants to win that case because he's a consultant for the companies that are in front of that judge. And if they win, he wins. I don't know if they plan to pay him or what exactly he expected to win in the long term, but for him, they had to win this case. So here's where it got complicated. We were looking at this as a bribery case. It seems pretty clear-cut. Someone's using their office for something that they shouldn't be doing, and they're getting a benefit for it. Seems pretty clear-cut. The problem was there was direct contact by email, but what the judge was doing didn't seem to be for the guy he was emailing with. There was this lawsuit that was in between. And in the beginning, we didn't know that, we'll call him the briber. We didn't know that he was affiliated with these companies, so we didn't quite understand why they were communicating. So in that particular case, when we first learned that they were communicating, and it seemed like there was some sort of backdoor trade or backhanded trade for what was happening in the case, first we looked at all the financials. There was no money exchanged. The judge never received a dollar from our briber. There was no direct transaction of any kind. So it was a little confusing. Why is this judge communicating with this guy apparently getting nothing in return. So unfortunately, in that case, we ended up having to interview pretty much everybody that the two of them knew. I could tell you that for about 6 months, I would leave in the morning at 5 in the morning, and I would interview every person I could find on the street, everywhere I could, until about 10 o'clock at night. I got bit by 2 dogs over the course of that thing just for doing that. But it turned out to be quite fruitful because we were able to eventually pick up the connection between our briber and the judge because we found this case in the middle. And had we just followed the money trail, we wouldn't have got there. But it turned out our briber had used that New York State LLC loophole, set up a couple of businesses, and was getting paid by the clients in front of the judge for the money. So he was getting paid. He just wasn't getting paid. The money wasn't going between him and the judge, but the bribery was still there. So to benefit in front of the judge, the lawyers on the case, the lawyers that actually appeared in front of the judge, had no idea any of this was going on. So for them, they couldn't figure out, and then I interviewed 2 of them, they couldn't figure out, we were winning all the time on a terrible case. They knew they had a bad case. They were actually planning to settle the case because it was a $20 million case. They figured if they could settle out for less than $5 million, their client wins because he should lose. And yet here they are, every time they show up to court, they're winning. And they're winning because they have this whole relationship going on in the background that they're completely unaware of. And when I interviewed the one lawyer, he said to me, I've always been a mediocre lawyer until this case. And all of a sudden now I'm a rock star. And he never could understand why. And then the reason why was because the judge was purposely ruling in their favor on every instance because of this other stuff that was going on. So what did we learn from that case? The first thing we learned is the bribery laws written in New York State and in many states in the US and probably many countries were written decades ago. They anticipated a direct payment between the person who benefited and the person who was abusing their office for that benefit. That doesn't happen very often. So as investigators, you have to, if you have a sense that there's something untoward, something shady or illegal happening, you can't be committed just to a direct transaction between what you would think is the bribed official and the person offering the bribe, because it just doesn't happen that way anymore. The second thing that we learned was that the favors can be so obfuscated that people themselves, in this case, the lawyers for the actual clients in court, are benefiting. But in effect, they were in some ways a victim because they didn't even know they were part of a bribery scheme. And so if we had simply focused on those lawyers, we wouldn't have been able to prove anything. Or the worst case is we would have viewed the lawyers that were actually trying the case as the perpetrators, when in fact the real perpetrator was somewhere else behind the scenes. So on the whole, I guess the issue is twofold. The first one is investigators, when you're working corruption cases, you can't assume any of the old tropes that are often thought of when you think of abuse of office. First of all, the laws haven't changed in a long time in most places. And what happens when the laws don't change? People get more and more clever about violating them without actually violating them. So you're going to see different, continuous evolution of the way corruption is done because they know what the law is. They know what cases have won and have lost in the past, right? If I'm a politician and I'm going to engage in an abuse of my office, I'm going to learn from what other people have done in the past that got put into jail or that got caught, right? So it's not going to be just a traditional sort of exchange of benefits between two parties. The other thing is there's so many new ways to do things now. 50 years ago, the way to do it was somebody had to put cash in an envelope and give it to somebody else. You didn't have your online banking. You didn't have your QR codes. You didn't have these sort of, in the virtual world accounts that money could be moved all around without ever seeing each other. So when it comes to trying to track the benefit, you have to be much more creative and much more thinking about the times that we're in. I had one case, and I won't get into the whole case, but in one case, the corruption was being done through PayPal. Now, I think there's PayPal in Nepal, right? So PayPal actually tracks transactions pretty well, but the problem is when you go and you want to do that financial audit, you may not know that PayPal account even exists because there's a whole bunch of ways to put money into it without using your own account. So you don't even know that there's this transaction process out there in the Netherlands that you haven't seen that is being being used to pass that benefit. So as investigators, you have to be keenly aware that there's a whole bunch of different ways to pass a benefit back and forth without two parties ever seeing each other. The days of surveillance for me in corruption cases are more or less over because our perpetrators in corruption cases very often never see each other. In some of the very famous cases in the United States over the last 5 years, and I won't name names, but some of you know probably generally who I'm talking about. Some of those cases, they were using encrypted text messaging. They were using encrypted emails. They were using what we call disappearing emails. There's all these ways now that people who want to exchange information or money or some other benefit can do it. And so from an investigative standpoint, you almost can't be effective at these types of investigations without at least considering the technological element. There's so many avenues. And the traditional state of policing, going out and doing interviews, also can't be forgotten. In the case that I just described, there was a lot of technical element to it, but until we went out on the streets and knocked on the doors and started asking people questions, we probably never would have got there. So when it comes to corruption, you have the laws, which are always going to be difficult because they're made to be difficult, or they're old and they don't account for new ways of doing things. But from the investigative side, you have a whole new slew of problems that weren't in existence even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. So investigators have to be particularly creative, and I think that to have a truly effective anti-corruption team, you need a couple of key things. You need someone who knows their way around finances, and by that, I don't just mean banks, but I also mean PayPal's, your online transaction methods, all that kind of thing. But someone that is capable of auditing a variety of different accounts. I mean, what's the big one now? Crypto, right? Cryptocurrency is a big one. But if you're technologically savvy, it's actually quite easy to trace crypto transactions. And the beauty of it is a lot of your corrupt officials that you're going after are not going to be as technically savvy. So they're going to think, because you read in the paper all the time, oh, crypto, it's untraceable. Well, it's not. So you need someone that understands those technologies and what's available out there. The second thing is you need someone who's technologically savvy because it's becoming more and more a virtual connection than it is a real connection. Two people that want to engage in a conspiracy never have to be in the same state or even the same country. So you need to have someone who understands those mediums for communication, how to get to them, and what to do when you get them. So it's all well and good to conduct a search warrant and get an email account from Google. But if you get that email account and you don't have someone who knows how to access it, open it, and read it, or if you get encrypted text messages and you don't have someone that knows how to access that stuff, that evidence is no good. So you have your financial and then you have your technological. And then the third element is you just need the old-fashioned traditional investigator. You need people to go out, knock on doors, ruin a few suits when the dogs bite you, or whatever the case is. You need those people that are willing to go out and do the old-fashioned work, because it's going to involve all three. And you may need some creative ways to prosecute corruption-related crimes, because the law is usually not going to be very clear. So in our case, oftentimes we initiate a proceeding by charging them with something that's not really thought of as corruption. We call it the false filing charge. We love that charge. It's the lowest level felony. Nobody goes to jail for it. But what it does is it puts a felony out there for, a public official who's been doing things they shouldn't be doing. And it's great because it usually gets them talking pretty quickly and cracks the case open. But it's totally not a corruption thing. It's a charge that you would charge someone for. Basically, for example, like it's often charged for taxes. When people file their taxes and they say their income is a bit lower than it was so that they can avoid paying taxes, the filing of that form is a false filing. Generally speaking, like I said, it's not a major crime. But usually when you can get that first charge to stick, that's when you can really approach the larger crime, which might be bribery or might be some other abuse of office. Also, sometimes that's a way to get to the underlings. So in the case of our election fraud, where they were using all these shell companies to bypass the electoral limits and to bypass the rules about running a campaign, most of the people at the bottom level who were doing the hard work, setting up the businesses and all that, they didn't have access to the money, but they were doing the logistic part. Most of those people were not ready to take a felony for a false filing because this guy wanted to get someone elected into office that they didn't even know. So it goes back to a little bit of traditional police work where you start at the bottom and you work your way up to the so-called big fish. But it's also cleverly sort of using the crimes at your disposal to get to the larger crime.
And I thank you for your nice presentation. And I would like to call upon the Board of Directors of United University of Free Generation, Mr. Bhuban Dahal, to conclude and give some thanks notes. Thank you so much.
Good evening and namaskar everyone. First of all, I would like to express gratitude to you all for making it today. And despite your busy schedule, you all listened to Robert, who came all the way from New York. And New York is not only financial capital of the US, in fact, it is the financial capital of the whole world. So he must have already investigated so many cases. And we had a lot of curiosities also from the side of audience. The number was not large. There were very important questions asked and you responded to that. So thank you so much. And I would like to, rather than vote of thanks, sometimes I would like to use the word vote of gratitude. I would like to express gratitude to you. And at the same time, once again, I would like to express gratitude to you all for making it. And University of Three Generations has been organizing such programs regularly, and sometimes we give you trouble also. And sometimes we organize digitally, sometimes we organize physically. So organizing, whenever we organize physically, definitely you have to come here all the way from home, lot of traffic jam. So that could be one of the reasons why there was a low turnout today. I don't want to spend much time. You all are busy. Once again, I would like to express gratitude to you all and a special gratitude to Robert Vanway. Thank you so much.